Welcome to Loup TV. I'm Gene along with Doug for Thursday, February 24th. Our three topics today are European regulators' view of American tech companies, second, Netflix ambitions in India, and third is don't forget about Reddit. Back to the top. Doug, we have been holding our commentary about what has been going on from a geopolitical standpoint because that is not our violin concerto. Tech is. But this story today caught my attention, caught our attention, that European EU regulators are looking to take industrial data and find ways to use that and remonetize it for the broader European community. It was a little bit ambiguous in terms of which companies are going to be targeted by this and which companies will have to give up their data and who ultimately benefits from that data. But it reminded us of this kind of needling that the EU and different individual countries have been doing against big tech. Think about some things that have happened with dating, I think, and some of the match relation related to Apple. And it just feels like every few weeks you hear something that Europe is doing. This has gone on for years. And my question is, does the change in the geopolitical environment somehow soften the edge that European regulators have viewed the US tech companies?
The answer is no. I don't think it matters at all. I think that they're totally separate issues, and I think, unfortunately, and I mean, there's probably a deeper discussion you could go into here, but unfortunately, I think that regulators on both sides in the EU and the US are going to continue to look at US tech and sort of try to figure out how do we legislate their power a little bit more. And I say unfortunately just because I do think there's this contrarian case to be made that strong US tech companies in a world where there is growing geopolitical uncertainty is a good thing for the Western
For
world.
sure.
And, I don't think we talk about that enough. I don't think that has anything to do specifically with the EU and the US, working together with the Ukraine situation. But I think it has everything to do, with some of what's going on in the East more broadly, and what that might mean over the long term.
My sense is you're right. It probably doesn't change anything. It might move the dial back a half of a notch on a 35 dial. But I do think what were some of this that has happened geopolitically, I think it does, like you said, change the conversation. It should, I should say. Let me word it in the frame of a question. You talked about it as a broader topic, but should it change the conversation? Should uh, U.S. lawmakers be thinking differently about how they regulate big tech, because this is ultimately more or less the groundwork where I think a lot of geopolitical conflict is going to happen is going to be around tech. So why not, instead of fighting big tech, why not embrace them and make them stronger?
There's probably some happy medium in the middle. I mean, I think there probably are certain areas where regulation might actually be beneficial to competition in the economy, and redistributing some of the money that some of these platforms earn. And we've talked a lot about the App Store question, and my position on that. I mean, I think that's a case where, whether it's government or otherwise, I think you're likely to see some changes there in how fees are structured. And I think what that means ultimately to me is these other companies that build on app stores, across the board, Microsoft, Apple, and Google, they're going to have more resources to reinvest in their products, right? I think that's kind of the goal with all of this. And so I don't think it should be overly punitive, and I don't think it should just be, let's hurt big tech for the sake of hurting big tech. But I think you have to kind of look on a case by case basis and say, is there a good reason here for why the government may or may not step in, and just be have good discretion around that. And I would say, on the other side of it, something else we talked about earlier this week, I think we should be thinking about how we interact with tech companies from outside of the US.
Hmm.
Obviously, other countries, China in particular, have
TikTok,
had,
AKA.
right. I mean, China has a very adversarial relationship with most US companies.
Hmm.
And
This can't
so
end well for TikTok.
it seems like there's probably a growing maybe question there. It's probably still, less likely than more likely that something bad happens, but I would say that the probabilities are changing in the favor of something happening,
Hmm.
more than they're going in the favor of something not happening.
Hmm. And of course, the winner is Facebook. This wasn't a plug for one of our portfolio companies, but they would be probably the most obvious winner. Maybe Snapchat has some benefit there too. But I think the sailing that wasn't meant to be part of this, but we'll take the sub Reddit theme. We're not going to jump to Reddit just yet. I am going to grab the final word on this topic. Agree with you that it doesn't change anything in terms of how European regulators think about U.S. tech companies. But I do believe if we are entering in to a Cold War, this is something that doesn't last for weeks. It lasts for years. I think you will see a change, and it's hard to measure like what causes a change in regulators and how they're approaching tech companies. And maybe you look at the number of votes in a given year that come up to do these things, but hard to measure. But I think that there will be a softening around that, and I think it is a positive for U.S. tech companies. I'm going to give you the last word on the next topic, which is Netflix. Back in December, or as in a couple of months ago, they lowered their price for the monthly subscription in India from call it $6.50 to call it $2, something like that. So they cut it pretty significantly. They've got around 5.5 million subs. Financial Times reporting 5.5 million subs in India. They're 2016. They had a goal, long-term goal of 100 million subs in India. So it's really not working for them. And my question is what's gone wrong, and what's the probability that they can fix it? Because the Netflix story is increasingly dependent upon international growth, and India is the biggest target out there.
What's gone wrong to me is they just haven't invested enough in sort of original content in the native language there. And if you think about Netflix's overall content budget, they spent high teens billions last year, and they're probably going to spend close to 20 billion this year. And so they spend an awful lot of money a year on content.
What
And the
was it
most
in
recent,
India? How much in India? Do we
yeah,
know?
the most recent stat I've seen there was around 400 million. And
Out of
so to put it
out
in
of 15 billion.
correct, so you can
So
put it
just,
into context,
I
it's
mean,
a few percent that they're spending on sort of native content there.
it feels like a mismanagement. If you think about the opportunity outlined in 2016, Bollywood, I mean, that's even somebody like me who doesn't know anything about Hollywood. I know that's a big deal. How does that? Would you agree that it seems almost hard to believe that they would have that target, but yet underinvest so significantly in the region?
Well, I think there is a trade-off too. I mean, one big thing is obviously the price that they charge is drastically different in India, and with that price cut, I
With
mean,
the
it's a
price
few
cut.
dollars a month, U.S. currency versus what it is here, in the teens. So there's a big difference between how much they can charge users, and so there should be a difference between what they do spend on content.
Oh, I gotcha.
But I think if you're serious about the region, you certainly have to spend
Mm.
more, I think, than 400 million. I don't know what that means. Is it a billion? Is it two? But more content always seems to lead to more subs. That feels like a universal truth for these premium content video services.
We went back and looked at the transcript from the interview that they did on the after the December quarter, and they talked about maximizing revenue in India. And ultimately, is the takeaway here that the Netflix growth story is just kind of running into some pretty heavy headwinds? Because if you play it forward and say they're going to have international growth, but in order to get sub growth, they got to cut prices by 75%. That doesn't sound like revenue maximization to me.
I think you're kind of faced with a choice, right? Like you either have to cut prices and hope you can drive through volume, or you have to spend more on content and maybe you can hold your prices steady and try to drive through quality, or maybe you do a little bit of both. So I think strategically, they've been in these markets for a while, and I think they probably know the markets well enough at this point to understand those levers and what they think is the best way to achieve the end goal. But I mean, I have to assume there's going to be a lot more experimentation between now and whatever ultimately happens. It's not easy, and it takes time to create good content and to build that catalog that people say, yes, I do want to spend a few dollars a month kind of into perpetuity because you have such great content, and I know you're going to keeping me entertained with new content.
What's more important, revenue maximization or sub growth for Netflix stock?
In the short run, sub growth; in the long run, revenue maximization.
And I'll give you a final word. You might have already covered it, but final word.
I think that's it. I think I'll just revert back to just the idea of the attention economy. We have a great battle going on, I think, between social media, between premium video services, between video games. And I don't think that the battle that we're seeing there will slow down at all. If anything, I think it will only be more intense. You're going to have better games, more engaging and immersive games on the gaming side. You're going to have more and more creative content and local content to the point of Netflix on the video side. And on the social media side, you have incredible creators, people like Mr. Beast, who's almost has 100 million subscribers on YouTube. So he's half of a Netflix, basically, going out and creating his own videos and kind of doing it himself. And I think he's inspired a generation of creators to try to follow him. So everywhere you look, you have these incredible products fighting for your attention. And a lot of them are very deserving of it.
And when you think about the attention or overdrive here on Netflix, the attention economy, and we think about time spent and that battle for time, battle for attention. There's a limited, obviously, number of hours in the day. Or is there more hours in the day now that 60% of people are working hybrid? They don't have to commute. That picks up an hour and 15 minutes a day. They don't have a boss looking over their shoulder during the day. That picks up 3 hours a day. Are they actually having more time to spend doing gaming and watching Netflix and YouTube?
Well, I think we saw a little bit of the peak of that, and probably maybe a return to sanity, just like the numbers in e-commerce. You kind of get the local peak, and then you kind of go back down to the normalized growth rate. I think the answer is, the internet and the smartphone have done so much to maximize how much time we spend with content. We did a study on this. I think it was 2 years ago, if I remember correctly,
this.
and the data was basically people spend something like 70% of their waking hours consuming content somehow.
Yeah. What was it like? We looked at it back like 50 years ago. Wasn't it like 15% of their time or something like that?
Yeah, it was, I think, maybe in the 30s. It was half of what we are today, less than half. And so it's been a dramatic change. And I mean, if you think about the last even 80 years, you kind of went from having radio to TV, and then you had TV to cable TV, and then you had the early internet, and then you had broadband, and you really had, I think, the sort of social media and the creator economy boom. And along the way, we also had video games and that. So, just think about how things have changed. And I think, the cherry on top of all of that is the smartphone, which brought all of it in your pocket. You don't have to sit in front of that device in your living room. And so it's hard to imagine how we find more hours, significantly more hours to consume content. I actually don't think AR will have that big of a change because we're so glued to our smartphones already. They'll have a small change, not a huge change.
Love it. Let's go to the final topic. Speaking of attention economy, Reddit, a company, a product, a platform that many of us use, approximately 430 million, I think, monthly active users. It's basically the same size as Snap and Twitter, more or less. And question, why doesn't they've recently made it popped up on our menu today because they've made some recent changes to the app and the experience, which they don't do very often. It's been a couple of years. But why is it that Reddit just kind of always feels like this topic that doesn't really come above the fold, and even though it gets used a lot?
That's really important because what Reddit has done is really build these communities around passions. And I think with the internet, passions are what stand out. Like, unless you're Netflix talking about, the mass broadest audience, they kind of serve everybody. The only other way to compete on the internet, if you're not serving everybody, is to serve only a few people. And to do that at scale, which is what Reddit's basically doing, is you have to create these sort of passion networks that can become really big, but the niche is really where they win.
Biggest example of those passion networks.
That's right.
Got it. And From a monetization standpoint, how do they make money?
They serve ads, same as other social networks. Basically, you can think of them as sort of rudimentary in-feed ads for the most part.
So,
So as you scroll through, a subreddit, you might see a sponsored post every once in a while. It's primarily text-based. We're starting to do some more with images, but I would say personally, in my view, the ad product is not yet as compelling as what Facebook has built. So they have kind of a long way to go there. I think they did about
do they have
350 million in revenue last year.
okay?
So there were some reports growing about 100%, and they're trying to get to a billion in revenue by 2023. So they've got some pretty high ambitions.
Got it. They have big advertisers. I mean, would national advertisers advertise? I would assume they would. I don't know who advertises on Reddit.
Some, and I mean, they use a lot of direct response, also just like Facebook. I don't know what the breakdown is. I haven't seen any data on that offhand. But obviously, I would say, given that they do about 350 million a year in revenue, for the bigger advertisers, generally that's going to fit more in kind of your experimental bucket versus your dedicated bucket, where Facebook, obviously, Instagram, TikTok, I think is growing big enough to kind of be in that dedicated bucket, where the experimental bucket is, hey, we're not really quite sure how to use this. We'll throw a little bit of money at it, but it's never going to take a lion's share until they really figure out how do we generate return, either from a brand perspective or from a DR perspective.
If you think about IPO window, uh, best guess of when that might be another some plans for them to be going this year. That's probably off the table right now.
Yeah.
Any thoughts? And then last, I'm going to get a number in my head too. I'd like you to get a number in your head. What you think assuming they get to that uh, uh, billion in revenue in 2023 and they go public on that, what the valuation would be. And I've got my number in my head.
In terms of the window, I mean, I think the window's closed, obviously for pretty clear reasons. I don't think the market has a lot of appetite for new issues, even quality ones like Reddit. I think that they are potentially, when you think about the kinds of companies that public investors want exposure to, it's a big growth market. It's still early in their monetization cycle. If they can figure out how to do ads in a really compelling way, they have a big opportunity. So I think the setup is attractive. In terms of the speculation on what's it's worth, I don't play the speculation game unless I'm actually putting money behind it. I'm not into that. I can tell you two things though. The last round that they raised at the end of last year, they had a $10 billion valuation, and there have been talks that they would try to go public at about a $15 billion valuation before the market fell apart. So to put it in perspective, that's kind of where the sentiment was at.
Yeah, that's a pretty big multiple on revenue if you compare it to like Facebook. Facebook is it's like a 6, 7, 8 times revenue multiple. That would be 10 times or 10 to 15 times. So I guess growing faster, so maybe get a bigger multiple would be the idea. And good news, we don't have to worry about it because they're not going to be going public anytime soon. We will be back real soon. That would be over the weekend with a look forward here on the next Loop TV. On behalf of Gene and Doug and Loop TV, bye for now.